Welcome to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax.
Hello and welcome back to Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax with Nora Devine. Nora has been a property tax attorney in private practice since 2005. She has developed a statewide practice in all jurisdictions in Illinois, and she represents all property classes. I'm Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode focuses on choosing the right appraiser for a property tax appeal. A strong appraiser can make or break your case, but not every appraiser is equipped for the tax appeal world. Nora, welcome back.
Thank you.
Why is an appraiser's role so central in a property tax appeal, and what separates a great valuation from one that might not hold up under review?
That's a great question, Kevin. I've been doing this work for decades and have worked with probably 100 appraisers over that period of time. And there is a big difference between the ones that can hold up in an adversarial process and ones that can't. And property tax in Illinois is dealt with by quasi-judicial administrative agencies, such as the Board of Review or the Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board. And by quasi-judicial administrative agency, we mean that there's a representative on one side representing the interests of the taxpayers, and then there's a representative on the other side representing the interest of the government, usually. And there's two different positions to be defended or advanced in every property tax case. And since we're talking about property tax value, which is subjective, a lot of the times at the highest levels of appeal, these contested matters come down to a battle of the experts. So it comes down to who has more credible testimony, who has better witnesses. And after the Board of Review level of appeal is over, you have a choice. You can either go to the circuit court or you can go to the Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board. At the Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board, when you're putting forward market evidence, say you're putting forward an appraisal or say you're putting forward evidence of a recent sale, then the burden of proof in those cases is called preponderance of the evidence. And roughly what that means is that if my evidence weighs more than your evidence, then I win. At the circuit court, the standard of proof is clear and convincing evidence, which is a much higher burden to meet. In either case, you want to have appraisal evidence. If you don't have appraisal evidence, it's going to be a tough situation unless you have a specific legal argument that you're trying to make.
Are there specific qualifications or perhaps designations that a property owner would want to look for when hiring an appraiser specifically for tax appeal work?
Yes, in Illinois, you didn't need to be licensed as an appraiser for a long time. That was really kind of a recent development, and it's fundamentally the licensure is required due to the fact that the banks rely on appraisal values in order to write loans. So when you see massive bank failure or massive, loan default, you end up with a situation where the taxpayers may be asked to bail the banks out. And we saw that after the market meltdown of 2006 and 2008 and so forth. So I think the licensure really came to be because of the lending appraisals and because the banks themselves and their solvency is so tied to whether or not the property value is actually there for the properties that they're loaning on. So with that in mind, we do have a mandatory licensing structure in Illinois. So appraisers in Illinois are licensed, and their continuing education credits are monitored, and they are disciplined through the Illinois Department of Professional and Financial Regulation, or called the IDFPR. So if you have a residential asset and you're trying to appeal the property taxes, you will be hiring somebody who's probably has a certified general appraisal license, or somebody who has an appraisal trainee license who's working underneath somebody that has a general appraisal license. Now, that's the minimal standard for licensure. Now, there's other designations that you can get from the Appraisal Institute. For example, you can get specialization qualifications just for residential, or if you're going to be appraising complex commercial assets, a lot of appraisers go through a process of getting their MAI designation. And MAI stands for Member of the Appraisal Institute. And it's like having a PhD in appraisal. You have to defend, an example of report. You have to go through all these classes. And that can have an impact on the outcome of an appeal. If one side has an MAI and the other side just has a certified general appraiser, you may see the trier of fact giving a little bit more weight to the appraiser that has the MAI. Not in all cases, but in some cases I have seen it.
Interesting. Yeah. So credentials can actually play a role in how someone views an appraisal.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a higher level of training, if the credential that you have was harder to obtain and harder to maintain, then it can lend more credibility to your work product.
Yeah, from a credibility standpoint, makes sense. Can you talk about how a property tax appeal appraisal is different from an appraisal, say, for financing, insurance, or sales purposes?
Getting an appraisal done for, say, financing or for estate planning purposes or for divorce or anything like that, they're usually going to put a valuation date that matters to the current effort. So if you're trying to write the loan, the evaluation date is going to be current as of the date of the loan application or something like that. If you are trying to do something for estate planning purposes, then the estate planning attorney may need the date of the report to be a certain thing under that area of law, which I don't know. But for my purposes, for property tax appeal purposes, you want the valuation date to be current as of January 1st of the tax year in question, because in Illinois, that's the lien date. And when they say lien date, that means the January 1st is the day that the tax lien actually attaches to the title of the property. And so for property tax purposes, you frequently see a valuation date of January 1st of the tax year that's being appealed.
When you review an appraisal report as part of an appeal, are there particular red flags that immediately tell you that a report might not survive scrutiny from an assessor or the board of review?
Yeah, sometimes if they're excluding comparable sales that are closer to the subject than the ones that they used, I think that's a bad fact and it's hard to overcome. I think also when the appraiser isn't making adjustments that are defensible, for example, like let's say a property was, has much more land and they only adjust, say, $10,000 for the fact that there's more land. And maybe that could be an easy thing for the other side to question the appraiser about. Is this adjustment appropriate? It's 2 acres instead of 1, your adjustment was low. So sometimes there's a lot of quibbling that can go on with the specific adjustments that are made to the sales comps that are chosen. And then sometimes there's a lot to be discussed about the dates of the transfers of the subject property versus the comparable property. So sometimes appraisers for property tax purposes will not use any sales that are subsequent to the lien date, which is January 1st. But in some jurisdictions, the board of review does want to consider some of those sales. So it's not like, as a property tax attorney, I should give them a blanket prohibition about using those sales. It really depends on the jurisdiction. There are some jurisdictions that will just cross a line through them and won't consider them at all. And then there's other jurisdictions that will say, okay, we will consider sales that are within 6 months after the lien date. And of course, whether the market is on the way up or on the way down, it can lead to different results here. So for example, if the market is on its way down and it's de-escalating rapidly, then they're saying, oh, that sale was after the lien date, we absolutely won't consider it. But if the market's on the way up and it's escalating rapidly, now all of a sudden we see boards of review saying, oh yeah, well, it was only 4 months after the lien date, it was within 6 months after the lien date, we'll consider it.
Weird, right?
So that is my number one complaint about assessing officials, is that I've been through a few real estate cycles at this point, and when the market is down and down fast, they had different standards than what we're seeing now that the market is up and on its way up fast.
Interesting. I mean, not that surprising, I guess, in a lot of ways, but still, yeah, that you'd like to see more of a balanced standard there, obviously.
It's just another one of those reasons about why I'll always have work to do.
That's right. That's a really good point. That's a very good point. Obviously, Illinois includes a wide range of property types, from the downtown high rises of Chicago to the suburbs just outside to farmland. How important is it to hire an appraiser with local and asset specific experience?
It can be very important, depending on how complex the asset is. If you hire an appraiser who's never done assisted living or and never done skilled care facilities, and they just don't know how to, go about those types of methodologies that work in, for the assessing officials and the way that they analyze the properties, you could really spin your wheels on some of those cases. Same thing with farm buildings and grain elevators. If you hire somebody who really knows nothing about farmland, it can be an uphill battle. And then sometimes downstate, you just do better when you hire someone that's local to their area, because you're already this city slicker attorney, coming down from Chicago, and what do you know anyway? And sometimes, not everywhere, but some places. And so, having that local touch with the appraiser who, lives in the next county over can be better, in terms of optics and just getting the conversation going about settlement and getting things going and trying to get it resolved at the lowest level possible.
We're talking about how to choose an appraiser here. Do you find that a lot of owners will choose an appraiser simply based on how much they charge?
We really discourage this.
Yeah.
We've had many clients over the years say, well, I know somebody who's an appraiser. Why would I pay your appraiser X number of dollars when I can pay my appraiser a few hundred less than that? So I have this boilerplate note that I send out to these clients that want to use some appraiser that doesn't do property tax. And I give them about 14 different things that I need this appraiser to do different for me and for my purposes, rather than, just doing what they would normally do for, say, a lending appraisal. Not just the valuation date being of January 1st, but also sometimes you're in a jurisdiction where they don't want to see sales that are too far beyond the lien date. So that's another restriction that they need to consider. And this is a retrospective valuation or opinion. So you may be ordering this appraisal 9 months, 18 months after the lien date. So you need this appraiser to go back in a time machine in their mind and actually consider what was the value as of January 1st of the tax year in question, not what the value is today. And financing appraisers are not skilled at that leap of logic and to go back in time and to imagine what the value could have been way back when. In other words, you have to intentionally blind yourself to the sales that have happened since then, and you have to then make the extraordinary assumption that you're valuing this property without knowledge of what happened after.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do.
And other things. Do you want to know more things about the different, like how I tell them? I say,
I would love
the other
to.
thing is, you want to definitely make sure that the appraiser is available to testify in person. A lot of people, they like the job as an appraiser because they can do it from their house. Yes, they have to do an inspection, but there's like minimal interpersonal exchange with the property owner at the inspection. The vast majority of commercial resident and residential appraisers who just do financing work are not what you need in terms of an adversarial legal proceeding where they're actually going to have to defend their value and they're actually going to have to answer questions about the report, their research methods, their methodologies for adjusting comps, why they excluded certain sales, why they included others, what they think about the income approach, why they used a certain vacancy rate, why they used a certain cap rate. So there's a lot of adversarial conversation that's going to happen about the opinion of value that they're developing, and not everybody is cut out for defending their value. A lot of people are just cut out for writing it down. So that's the main thing. So you want to know, can they testify? Will they testify? How much will it cost for them to testify? Usually you want to get two different rates. How much will it be for an in-person hearing? How much will it be for a remote one? And, even just being in a larger case where there's a court reporter and there's like protocol and it's kind of formal, you need to make sure that somebody has some experience with being in that environment.
Yeah, you want to know that they're capable of handling that pressure, because it's definitely a different situation if you've never been involved in that.
I've seen appraisers get extremely insulted at just being asked moderate questions. And
really,
and that is not what you need. You're licensed, you're a professional, you have an opinion. You're allowed to have your opinion. You're here to defend your opinion. It's not a good time to get defensive. That's not helpful to the proceeding.
They feel like they're being attacked. Is that what it is?
Yeah, but that's why I use appraisers that understand that they're developing a value that will need to be defended later.
Right. Can you walk us through how an attorney and an appraiser should collaborate before and during a hearing to make sure that the valuation evidence is consistent as well as you just pointed out, defensible?
Well, importantly, the attorneys who represent the taxpayers do not want to be recommending appraisals that end up being unhelpful for the property tax appeal cycle or system. So in other words, if the property is valued at $1 million and I tell the client, you really should get an appraisal in order to help you reduce your property taxes, and then the appraisal report comes in at $1.2 million, you can imagine that I wouldn't have very many clients and they wouldn't really want to work with me again after they spent X number of dollars on an appraisal that actually came in at a higher value than what the assessor had. So what the appraisers do is they develop what's called a preliminary opinion of value, which is under their rules, their ethical rules that they have to follow, which is the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, or they call it USPAP. They're allowed to develop a self-contained appraisal report that has a value in it, but it's basically a short, it's short, it's a few pages long, and it does comply with USPAP, but it's not a fully developed appraisal report that you could submit to the record and actually use as evidence. So they give you like a mini appraisal before they, agree to be hired to do the fully developed appraisal.
So how does it work when an assessor's value and your appraiser's value are super, super far apart? How do you go about bridging that gap?
It happens. It definitely happens. And it takes a while sometimes. I mean, some of these cases can go on and on for years. And usually when there's a massive gap like that, after the board of review closes, if the board of review's final board certified value is nowhere near what the taxpayer's appraiser is, usually that draws the involvement of the taxing districts, such as the school districts, because they do not want their clients to be in a position where they have to pay out large refunds, because it really does wreak havoc with the funding of the schools and the other taxing bodies that have an interest in the outcome of the assessment dispute. So usually the intervener will take notice when there is a situation like that, and the school district themselves will use their own budget money to get their own appraisal in order to shore up the government's side in terms of defending what the assessor has done. Sometimes, and we're seeing this more and more and more lately, the taxing district gets their own report, and their own report suggests that there should be a reduction below what the assessor has proposed and what the board has certified. So the first time in my career in the last 5 years, we have intervening taxing bodies who are getting involved at the board of review, not because they want to see the property taxes raised, but because they want to collaborate with the taxpayer to make sure that a fair value is reached before the tax bills are printed. Because if you wait until after the tax bills are printed, then you have all these taxing districts that are in refund situations, which is very difficult for them to manage from a budgetary standpoint.
Okay. So as we finish up, you've mentioned several different aspects of an appraiser that are good and maybe bad, or maybe not quite right, or whatever we want to call it. Do you have any tips, kind of final tips for vetting an appraiser at the beginning?
Well, make sure they're going to be available to testify. I've heard stories of an appraiser who used to write reports for property tax purposes, and he retired from appraising, and then he took a job as a tax analyst in a property tax appeal firm and told everybody, I'm not showing up to any hearings. And so you've got like hundreds and hundreds of cases where the appraiser is no longer available to testify, and it puts the taxpayer in a heck of a position because there was a recent case that just came out maybe last week, and it was about how Property Tax Appeal Board had censured an appraiser, but what they did was they dismissed all the property tax appeals because the appraiser had let their license lapse, and the appraiser was no longer licensed anymore and therefore could not testify as to the value of the property. And the appellate court reversed the Property Tax Appeal Board's decision there and said that it's not for them to censure appraisers. It's for the IDFPR to censure appraisers. And if there was something up with the appraiser's licensure, then they have to find some other outcome for the taxpayer other than just dismissing their appeals. They said that's not fair, but they didn't say what would be fair. They remanded the case back to the Property Tax Appeal Board with instructions that they figure out something else that would be fair. So it is a problem if your appraiser lets their license lapse, or if they have a licensure problem in general, or if they're an out-of-state appraiser who is coming into the jurisdiction to appraise a special use property, they can apply for a interim license to do that one report as long as they haven't been disciplined in other jurisdictions. But then they have to wait for that to be granted before they sign the report and deliver it. And so we've seen an out-of-state appraiser who did a nuclear power plant in Illinois who delivered the report before they got the official licensure from the IDFPR. And they actually IDFPR did discipline that appraiser and fined him $20,000. So, you have to have a license in Illinois on the day that you sign and deliver the report is the takeaway from that.
Yeah, I would say so. All right, well, good advice as always. That's it for today's episode of Devine Intervention, shedding light on Illinois property tax. If you're planning a property tax appeal and want guidance on selecting the right appraiser or reviewing an appraisal you've already received, Nora and her team at the Devine Law Group are here to help. Visit thedevinelawgroup.com to learn more, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review so other Illinois property owners can find the show. Nora, it's always great having you here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.